My childhood babysitter turned out to be a monster, and I failed to catch her. Hey, I've seen a lot of stories on this forum that are supernatural, and I experienced something of the sort when I was a kid. If anybody knows anything, please help. I know what I've seen is real, but nobody else believes me. Here's my story. Forgive me if I'm not that good of a writer. When I was about 8, me and my mom moved into a small house in the countryside. She'd gone through a nasty divorce, but she had been lucky enough to find a good deal on the place. It had 3 bedrooms and a backyard with a forest behind it. For a while, everything was great, until eventually my mom had to return to her office job, and she hired a babysitter. The girl she hired was pretty young, 19 at most. She introduced herself as Carla. Carla was the most good-looking person I'd ever seen with my prepubescent eyes. She was Filipino, with long dark hair and this killer smile. The first few times she'd come over to watch over me were great. She'd bring board games to play together and buy me snacks before she came over. The one thing Carla was strict about was me always going to bed by 9 p.m. Not a minute later. Still, she became my favorite person quickly. I'd run from my school bus to see her already there, smiling with her perfect teeth. Then I started to notice stuff about her, like the way she'd walk kind of awkwardly, or the way her pupils were always a bit dilated, like she was in a dark room. Of course, I could care less. She was my best friend, and I wouldn't judge her for her little quirks. One night, when my mom was on a particularly late shift, I couldn't sleep. I turned my body to the window that was near my bed and watched the tree leaves shake and sway in the breeze. I was just about to drift off when I saw a naked Carla sprint towards the backyard fence. I sat up straight in my bed and stared at her in disbelief. Carla didn't stop when she reached the fence. Instead, she vaulted her body over it and landed on her feet, continuing running without a pause, till she disappeared into the dark between the trees. My mouth was wide open in disbelief. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. What is she doing in the woods? Why was she naked? How did she jump over the fence like that? I stayed up all night with those questions, staring out the window for her return. Sure enough, a few hours later, she returned. She walked slowly this time, and when she climbed the fence and came inside the house, there was no sense of urgency like before. The light from the open back door revealed a scar that ran all the way around her waist, and her mouth covered in a dark liquid. I spent the whole night awake in my bed, thinking of what I had seen. That morning, I told my mom everything. She looked at me like I was crazy and scolded me for making up stories about Carla. "She's so nice to you, Marcus. Why would you say those things about her?" I cut my losses and apologized, then asked if I could stay home that day. Thankfully, she agreed, on the condition that I didn't leave the house and only open the door for Carla. Maybe she was just weird. Going to the woods could just be some hobby. She probably just ate berries or something, I rationalized. After a long day of laying around thinking of explanations, the doorbell finally rang. I sighed and opened the door. My babysitter's hair was pinned up in a bun, and she wore a pair of low-rise jeans and a sweater. She smiled when she saw me.
"Hi, Marcus."
Looking at her then, I started to think I was wrong about what I had seen, and I started to calm down. I must have drifted off at some point and dreamt it, I thought.
"I bought some board games for us to play,"
she said, walking inside and setting her tote bag down on the coffee table. We spent the day goofing off, and I quickly began to forget what I had seen. That was until she reached for a box of cereal on top of the fridge. Her shirt lifted, revealing the scar surrounding her torso. "Hey, how did you get that scar?" I asked, pointing towards her exposed stomach.
"Oh, this?
Her face momentarily faltered before she answered.
It's from an accident I've been in."
I didn't press further, but even at my young age, I was a bit suspicious. Still, I had no reason to believe otherwise, and decided to ignore it. That night, I pretended to go to bed. When I heard her footsteps go downstairs, I shot up and peered out the window, just in time to see Carla sprint across the backyard. I jumped out of bed and grabbed the Spider-Man flashlight my dad had once given me. Gathering my courage, I bounded down the stairs, pulling on some tennis shoes and running across my backyard. I needed to see what she was doing out there. By the time I had finished climbing the tall chain-link fence and had reached the tree line, I heard Carla groaning in the distance. I followed the sound, nervous to what I might find. The forest was only illuminated by my flashlight and the moon, and I got more afraid with each step I took. As I finally reached the source of the sound, I switched it off. I arrived at a clearing and hid behind a tree, peeking around it. That's when I saw her. Carla, with large black wings and a long tongue that reached her navel. The wings looked as if they had ripped through her back and flapped with as much effort as she could muster, and she was detaching herself from her lower body. I covered my mouth to stifle a scream, frozen in place by my own fear. Carla's groans turned into a final scream as she finally detached her upper body, her entrails hanging out of her as her wings flapped. Sharp teeth glistened in the moonlight as she flew off into the distance, leaving her lower half abandoned the ground. I collapsed onto the floor and gripped my chest, my heart pounding in my ears. She wasn't human. There was no way she was human. It took all my strength to lift my shaking body off the ground and back to my house. My mind swirled with a million questions. I don't even remember going into my room. As I laid in my bed shaking, I watched her return. She would have looked normal, if not for her mouth, covered in what I now knew to be blood, and lack of clothes. I winced when I heard the front door open. This thing was in our house. I squeezed my eyes shut and prayed for what felt like hours, until I finally heard my mom pull into our driveway and enter our house. "Hey, how's Marcus doing?"
Oh, he's fast asleep as always, ma'am.
I heard the front door open and close a few moments later, and finally she was gone. I cried in relief and lingering fear. My mom would never believe me. Nobody would. That's when I came up with a plan. I had to destroy her lower half. She'd have nowhere to return to if I destroyed it. It was the only way. The next evening, I avoided Carla for as long as I could, until finally she asked,
What's up with you?
I complained of a made-up stomachache and she laid off. Every time I looked at her, all I saw was gnashing sharp teeth and exposed entrails. I wanted to pretend it never happened, but I couldn't. Any day she could attack me and my mother. I had to prove what she was. I waited in bed until I saw her disappear into the woods again. My heart pounded in my chest. I knew what I had to do. I grabbed a jug of gasoline from the garage and some old matches from the kitchen. I put on some boots and a jacket, and packed my flashlight and an old digital camera. I used her tote bag to carry it all. She wouldn't be needing it after tonight. Her clothes lay on our couch as I headed out. I sprinted through the woods, my legs already burning from climbing the fence. Carla would have to fly away when the sun rose. Everybody would see her true form. All I had to do was destroy her landing spot. Sure enough, by the time I arrived, Carla, or at least half of her, was gone. Her lower half laid sprawled out on the ground. I did one final check to make sure she was gone, then crept out into the clearing. I absolutely drenched her legs in gasoline and lit a single match. I took a deep breath and set the legs on fire. They burned for at least an hour, maybe more. I hid behind a tree, awaiting her return. The camera clutched close to my chest. Only the flames crackling kept me company that night. After an eternity, she finally flew into the clearing. When she saw what remained of her lower body, she screamed a guttural, ear-piercing scream. It could have been heard for miles. I dropped the camera and covered my ears, wincing. That was my biggest mistake. Carla whipped her head around, still hovering above the ground. I clapped my hands over my mouth. She looked in my direction for a moment, and tears spilled from my horrified eyes. Then she flew directly towards me. I screamed and bounded through the forest with no idea where I was going. I could hear her now inhuman voice screaming at me from behind.
You could have been one of us. You could have had strength and flight. Tonight you will die instead.
She screamed, her large wings narrowly avoiding each branch as she got closer and closer. I cried as I ran, regretting ever leaving my house. My lungs burned. I'd never moved that fast in my life, but it was barely fast enough. Finally, I ducked behind another tree and she passed me, still screaming. I stayed standing behind that tree until morning, and even then it took me hours to find my way home. When I arrived, our house was filled with police, with my mom sobbing in the living room. I told them everything, sure that now there was irrefutable proof. But when we arrived at the clearing, there was nothing. The charred legs were gone, along with Carla. I instantly started yelling when I faced this revelation. But that's impossible! I swear it was right here! The officers all looked at me with pity. They chalked it up to me seeing Carla run off and then hallucinating in the woods. I know what I saw was true, but I've decided to never speak of it again until now. If anybody knows anything about this, feel free to help me out. And that was My Childhood Babysitter Turned Out to Be a Monster, and I Failed to Catch Her by Shopping for Stars. So, going into it, I especially kind of giving the initial description and stuff, I'm like, oh, okay, a monster, it could be any kind of monster, right? And that's the beauty of it. What kind of monster are we dealing with? And as the descriptions kind of started coming out and everything, and I didn't know a whole lot about, like, Filipino folklore and mythology and stuff like that, their mythical creatures, urban legends and stuff, I was like, oh, okay, well, what would it be in the terms I at least understand via, like, Western folklore and stuff? And a couple of things came to mind initially was, like, obviously some kind of a harpy thing, some kind of a vampiric creature. I was going to say maybe a siren, banshee kind of thing, but not quite. Banshees are a little bit more, like, spectral in a sense. I mean, they can be more human-like as well, but still. I was like, is it going to be some kind of a singing thing? And no, it's not any of that. There's a level of screaming, so I guess there's kind of an element of that, but I wouldn't say it's anything hallucinatory or hypnotic in a sense. So I didn't fully know. There's also like the what was the other one I had in mind? It was a Japanese one. Hang on. Oh, God, what is it? The other thought I had was it's from Japanese folklore. It's a yokai. This is the Nuke Kubi. It's possesses thirst for blood and are more violent than Roku Kubi. But basically, they're like floating heads and stuff that detach from bodies. So I was like, oh, it could be something kind of like that. Is that the one I'm thinking of, or am I thinking of something else? Oh God, no. It's the I think that's it, but I could be wrong. Oh no. But nevertheless, it turned out to not be any of those creatures. It's actually a proper Filipino one that we found in the comments down below. And it says, correct me if I'm wrong, but that sounds like the Mananagal from Filipino folklore. And Shopping for Stars responded, you got it. I love Filipino folklore. They always have the best monsters. Sad that most are created / changed up by Spanish colonizers with bad intentions. Very interesting. Didn't know much about that. So the Manananggal, not to be confused with Mananambal. We'll have a look at that another time. The Manananggal, also known as Remover, is a mythical creature in the Philippines that is able to separate its upper torso from the lower part of its body. Their fangs and wings give them a vampire-like appearance. It's always really cool to learn a little bit more of different folklore and creepy urban legends and stories and stuff like that. And this is no exception. It's fantastic. It's a horrific-looking creature, I'm not gonna lie. So it's kind of a vampire-y thing. The Christian equivalent is apparently a vampire, so it's very, very similar, but not exactly like a vampire. So it's interesting. It's very, very interesting. I really enjoyed that actually. I thought that was great. It's another really good little story. Not crazy long, but nothing wrong with that. I think if you can get a lot of good little bits into a story, that's all you really need. And this is no exception. I'm really glad that I had yet again Space Pants Plays, aka Jenny, my partner, to play Carla in this one. Thank you so much, babe. And yeah, another great story. Really, really glad we got to cover this one. I'm Nate at Night. I've really enjoyed myself, and I sure hope you have too. I also hope I've educated you a little bit on some more mystical creatures. Very fun stuff. Take care out there.
You could have been one of us. You could have had strength and flight. Tonight you will die instead. You could have been one of us. You could have had strength and flight. Tonight you will die instead. I don't know how to deliver this fucking line. Just pick whichever one. I think maybe you should do a little bit of a weird distorted filter over one of those. Let me know if you want me to redo it in case it like sticks out randomly.
You could have been one of us. You could have had strength and flight. Tonight you'll die instead.
That's personally my favorite.
Thank you so much to my YouTube members and Patreon members for all the love and support. It's thanks to people like you that we can keep growing.